Hello and welcome back to my Mastering Rulers class. I'm Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy, and this is a free class I put together to show you how to become successful with quilting with rulers. Last week we used Taj to create a fun border design. Well, now we're going to switch it up and use Chevy to quilt a curvy design that's going to work great in the background areas of your quilt. You're going to learn how to use a curvy ruler. We'll talk about varying your spacing to get a fun effect, and then I'll show you how to quilt it on a long arm. Well, that's enough talking. Let's get to quilting. I'm going to start quilting along the edge and then stop when I get to the middle point. Now, even though it's nice and long, I'm only going to quilt within my fingertips, and that's the most important thing about quilting with this kind of ruler. Once I get to the edge of my fingertips, I'm going to reposition my hand along the ruler and then resume. And then I'm going to stop when I approach that middle point. That's going to be my reference line for repeating. Then I'm going to come down here, reposition the ruler again so that the needle stop is snug against the foot. Take a moment and make sure that it's running parallel with some of the seams on the blocks. And then I'm going to repeat going to that center point. Pause, reposition my hands. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing down on the ruler and I'm using my hand on the quilt, and I'm almost treating the ruler as though it's a handle. It's going to help me move the whole quilt along. We happen to be filling in between the points of our star. So what I'm going to do is keep going until I run into the edge. Reposition, and then I'm going to stop as soon as I hit the edge of my area, which happens to be right there. Now I'm going to echo the line I've just quilted. So I'm going to keep him in place. I'm going to slide him over about 1/4 of an inch, or however much I want to have the spacing be, and then I'm going to work my way back up that needle stop. Shifting my ruler over instead of picking it up and moving it will help ensure that I have that same shape when I go to echo it. Now, instead of repositioning to my needle stop, I'm going to reposition to my halfway mark and echo the line back up towards the top. When I get past my fingertips, walking my hand along the ruler and quilting along. Repositioning until I have my first 2 lines. Now I can keep echoing that, but I think what I'll do is travel over about 1/2 of an inch so I can have some closer and further apart spacing. I know that this edge of my area will always start at the needle stop, and that's going to help me start my next line out and have it look right. Sliding the ruler over, quilting to it, and then going back up. Now, I prefer to work from the left side of the foot, and I prefer to work vertically. That way my whole body momentum can help me quilt. Of course, if you wanted to, you could work from the other side, or you can rotate and work horizontal or vertical. The main thing is to try all different directions and see which one works best for you. One of the trickiest parts about quilting with rulers is when you have to stop and reposition the ruler. What tends to happen is you can get some really tiny stitches, or you can get some big stitches as you're speeding up and slowing down. So as I reposition my ruler, I'm going to try really hard to move at a consistent pace so that I don't get really small stitches or really big ones. Honestly though, it doesn't matter, because when you're done, all you're going to see is the overall texture. The trickiest part for me, however, is when I go from the middle of the ruler to the needle stop. I tend to get a little bit of a shifting or a big stitch as I go. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm not pulling on the quilt in either direction, that I'm just pressing down, and then I'm going to continue on. And as you approach the far edge of your area, you're just going to travel along that to get to your next line. It's going to be a little trickier to line up your ruler, but what you'll do is just use your previously quilted line kind of as a guide where you'll put it. So here I can see that's the beginning of my curve, and so I'm going to line up the curve of my ruler and try to get it as close as I can. I think people will notice a gap in the quilting before they notice an error, so as long as the whole thing is filled in, it's going to look great. Now we only quilted that texture in 1/2 of our star. What we're going to do now in the other half is play with some fun variations so that you can pick your favorite and quilt it on your quilt. Instead of stopping at the halfway mark, we're going to quilt along the whole ruler. Now Chevy's not going to fit in this area, but that's fine. We're going to quilt until we run into the edge and then travel and fill in around it. And because I love echoing, I'm going to travel over and echo the line I've just quilted. Let's say about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch. And I'm going to go until I run to my other area. Now what I want to do is travel along the edge so I can quilt the same shape in the opposite direction. Of course, you don't have to do this. You could just cut your thread and start over. And what's nice about Chevy is I can align them so that I don't have to rotate the ruler to turn the corner of my area. And I'm going to travel till I'm about 1/4 of an inch away from the one I've just quilted. And what I want to do is flip it around so that it's the opposite image. I could do one of two things. I could put my ruler right here and quilt it this way, or I could quilt along the straight edge and then reposition it up here. As I approach that little curve, that means that this guy needs to curve away. So I'm going to position them just so and quilt along that edge. So I'm going to go until I run into the area and then do the same thing, traveling along the edge. I'm going to reposition my ruler, looking at my previously quilted line to make sure that it's kind of where it needs to be. Now I've been quilting vertically so that you can see how I prefer to do it. So what I'm going to do is rotate the ruler in the quilt so that you can see what it looks like quilting horizontally. And once I have it in place, then I'm going to push down and quilt along the edge of the ruler. When I'm quilting horizontally, I tend to keep both my hands on the ruler. Now the benefit is I can see my whole path of quilting, so that's really nice. And I'm going to keep quilting my lines and echoing until I fill in my area. And I think I'll just do a couple more echo lines. Well, I love how that looks, but if you wanted to add a little bit more quilting, what you could do is quilt another section of them in the opposite direction. Now, of course, I'm using the purple thread so that you can see the quilting that I'm doing. If you're quilting along with the coordinating thread collection, go ahead and use the cream color, because that's going to let you see that beautiful texture without noticing every little unintentional customization. By quilting along the whole ruler, flipping it around, and adding echoing, I get a fun, completely different look that's going to add a little bit more texture to your quilt. Okay, so I quilted a little bit of the area with my sewing machine. Now let's see what it looks like to quilt this on the long arm. I'm going to start quilting along the edge and then stop when I get to the middle point. Reposition the ruler so the needle stop is snug against the foot. Take a moment and make sure that it's running parallel with some of the seams on the blocks. And then I'm going to repeat going to that center point. Now what's nice about practicing quilting with rulers on actual quilts is that you have seams that will help you line up your ruler. If you're practicing on a piece of fabric, it can be hard to know where your ruler position is in reference to the previous line. But with the seams that come in these blocks, you can use those as your guidelines. Perhaps the trickiest part about quilting with a ruler on a long arm is keeping it in place. If you find the ruler slipping or moving around, just stop, reposition, and start up again. You don't have to do the whole line in one continuous movement. You can take your time and break it up into steps. And as you work your way back in the direction you came from, remember that you're going to go from the middle of the ruler to the needle stop, just opposite of what you did in the first step. After quilting the initial set of lines, I'm going to fill in above it before I move on. Just repeat the steps before, traveling along the top or side of the area, quilting your line, and echoing. Even though I'm using different spaced echoing, you can make them all consistent, or you can vary it by quilting at all different widths. Now I know I say this a lot, but it's more important that the whole area is filled in than if it's perfect, because I think people will notice a gap in the quilting before they notice the error. So just keep going and filling in the area because it's going to look great. Once I've filled in the top part of the block, all I have to do is travel along the edge and quilt the rest of the block. Since you can't change the orientation of your quilt on a long arm, you're going to need to get comfortable with quilting the ruler in all different directions. If you find that one direction feels more comfortable than the other, go ahead and practice in that direction. That'll help you get comfortable with the ruler, and then you can learn how to quilt it in all different directions. And if that wasn't enough to think about, once you get comfortable quilting Chevy in all different directions, you'll want to practice quilting from all different sides of the foot, especially as you start getting into mirror images or flipping the design. I promise though, it doesn't take that long to get comfortable with it. But no matter which way you quilt Chevy, the most important thing is to quilt only within your fingertips. That's going to give you the most control and keep your fingers safe. All right, now it's your turn. Go ahead and get your Chevy ruler and try quilting that in the background area of one of your blocks. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can check out the quilting diagrams. There's a link in the description box below, and they show you where to place each design on your quilt if you want yours to look just like mine. Now, if you haven't made your quilt yet, you can still get the kit, and the information about that is below. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm not here just to talk to you. I want to hear how you're doing and see if I can help you be successful with your rulers. Well, go ahead and give it a go, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to use Elvira to quilt continuous curves in our blocks.